Good morning, everyone, Excellencies, Assistant Secretary General, friends, and colleagues. My name is Madeline Sinclair, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of Amnesty International and my own organization, the International Service for Human Rights, to the 2021 Human Rights Council pledging event. Today's event provides candidates for membership of the Human Rights Council the opportunity to present their vision for membership and the priorities they will work on if elected. It's also an opportunity to question candidates on their human rights records and pledges. I would like to start by extending a special thanks to the 3 permanent missions who are sponsoring this event: Australia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Slovakia. Their support was essential, and our sincere thanks go to the ambassadors and their hardworking teams. Our organizations are also incredibly grateful to the Assistant Secretary General and her team for being here today and for moderating this event again this year. Amnesty and ISHR have been proud to organize this event for 10 years. We are delighted that this year there are 11 candidates joining the event, and all regions are represented. 7 candidates declined to participate: Benin, Eritrea, the Gambia, Somalia, India, Kazakhstan, and the United Arab Emirates. Elections to the Human Rights Council are often not as competitive as we would hope. Unfortunately, closed slates are common. We are dismayed that this year, all regional group slates are closed. We strongly encourage all regions to reconsider this practice in the future. Nonetheless, the next 2.5 hours will provide an opportunity for dialogue between candidate states and stakeholders, and is an important exercise in transparency and accountability. We are very happy to see, once again, a large number of attendees, including civil society in candidate states from across the world and time zones, joining us for this event, facilitated by its online nature. The Human Rights Council's success depends on its members and their readiness to fully implement the Council's mandate set out in General Assembly Resolution 6251. That resolution recognizes the importance of engagement and cooperation with all stakeholders in the Council's work, and most importantly, that member states shall uphold the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. Lastly, I want to highlight that ISHR has prepared scorecards offering a quick, at-a-glance, objective analysis of each candidate, focusing on such criteria as cooperation with the Council, support for civil society, engagement with UN treaty bodies and special procedures, among others. We will share a link to the scorecards in the chat. A brief word on the technical elements of today's meeting. You will see that there is live interpretation available. Please select the language of your choice between English, French, and Spanish. The language options are at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will also have live captioning of the event in English. The event is also being webcast through ISHR's YouTube channel at ISHR Global in English, French, and Spanish. With that said, let me wish all the state candidates good luck today. Assistant Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madeleine, and sincere thanks to the organizers, again, of this very important event, Amnesty International and the International Service for Human Rights. And of course, our thanks as well to the co-sponsors, Australia, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Slovak Republic. And the thank you to Australia for the financial support for this event as well. As we know, sadly, we always need to as well include that plea. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2021 Human Rights Council pledging event. Allow me to stress first a few key points regarding membership in the Human Rights Council. Progress has been made to enable more states to win seats on the Council. However, more work is needed to ensure a broader membership base, in particular among LDCs and SIDS. Such countries, for example, the Marshall Islands, Bahamas, Fiji, were behind many initiatives and helped the Council adopt many resolutions without significant difficulties and often or sometimes without a vote. The issue of membership obligations cannot be overlooked, in particular with regard to the heavy workload that the Council has year after year during its regular session. In order to be more effective as members, delegations have to follow most, if not all, debates, initiatives, and informal consultations, as well as the voting process. The sheer amount of workload can be a real obstacle for many countries to seek membership because they do not have the requisite capacity. The UN Human Rights Office, in particular the Human Rights Council branch, always stands ready to provide advice and support to current and prospective members on the program of work, rules of procedure, and the voting process, as well as through the Trust Fund for Participation of SIDS and LDCs in the work of the Council. The Council is not supposed to be a club with restricted membership. The fact that countries with mixed human rights records may join the Council as members could serve to encourage them to accelerate domestic efforts with a view to effectively addressing the human rights problems they face. No country, as we know, has a perfect human rights record, and no state can therefore claim that they do not have human rights concerns. No state is immune from scrutiny of their own human rights record, whether they are a member or not. Council membership often reinitiates critical human rights discussions in countries, and that we should see as a good thing. In order to address the membership issue, the best course of action is to minimize the clean slates practice and ensure that there's real competition in all groups. Therefore, we think it would be helpful if leading human rights states, those who care particularly about the process as well, would actually take the lead in those efforts to ensure that the practice of clean slates is stopped in their own regional groups. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event provides candidates for membership of the Human Rights Council for the term 2022 to 2024 the opportunity to present their vision for membership and the priorities they will work towards if elected. It's also an opportunity for stakeholders to ask questions to candidates on their human rights records and pledges. This event has become part of the annual calendar of events in New York and Geneva. ISHR is pleased to have been associated with it for several years, and I'm delighted to continue this tradition, an opportunity for dialogue between stakeholders, and an important exercise in transparency and accountability. I wish to extend sincere thanks to the 12 candidates who accepted the invitation to join us today, namely Argentina, Cameroon, Finland, Honduras, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Montenegro, Paraguay, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and the United States. I applaud their willingness to engage and thank them for approaching the exercise in a spirit of transparency and accountability. All 18 candidate states were invited to join us today, and 7 candidates declined to participate, as we heard. A few words on the format of today's event. In the opening segment, each state participating has been asked to outline in 90 seconds what they hope to achieve through its membership, both at the national and international level. In the second segment, we will
como internacional.
Questions will be taken from both Twitter using the hashtag #HRCpledging and the Zoom Q&A. We will be taking general questions directed to all states, as well as questions directed at specific states, including those participating in today's event and those who are not joining us today. Questions posed through the Q&A function can be liked by other audience members, and please, those questions posed by others, you can also like them as well, so that the organizers get a sense of the questions with an interest, how many are interested in those particular questions. In the second segment, to ensure the greatest opportunity for engagement between candidate states and the audience, we urge candidates to be short and concise in your responses, not exceeding 2 or a real maximum of 3 minutes. Representatives exceeding 3 minutes per response will be gently reminded to wrap up. Our aim is to have a rich and dynamic discussion. As there will be likely to be more questions shared than time available, any questions shared that are not asked during this event will be collated and forwarded to the respective candidates and also posted online. So before we turn to the candidate states for their opening statements, I'd like to give the floor to co-sponsors for some opening remarks. I invite His Excellency, Monsieur Etienne Kindia, Permanent Representative of Côte d'Ivoire, to the UN in Geneva to make some brief opening remarks on behalf of the co-sponsors. Ambassador Kindia, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame. Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Mesdames et
Thank you. Thank you, dear participants. I'm very happy to take part in this initiative, and would like to thank the organizers, not just for their work in defending human rights everywhere in the world. I would like to welcome and thank our friend in order to stress the importance in fighting for human rights. Ivory Coast is a co-sponsor and is very happy to be able to take part in this pledging event for the candidates for the election 22-24, so that they can share their vision and their ideas and their commitment for human rights. So I would like also to thank all the countries which decided to take part in this event, because their commitment is going to be more and more important, and they want to share in this way, in a transparent way, their strategy. So when they elect members at the council, there is also an assignment for candidates and the promotion and protection of human rights and their commitment. And the elected members in the council do play a fundamental role at international level and inside the mechanisms of the council. To conclude, I would like to give the availability of Ivory Coast to support all candidates for the promotion and protection of human rights everywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Kindia. And now I would like to invite His Excellency Jeff Roach, Deputy Permanent Representative of Australia to the UN in Geneva, to make some brief remarks. Ambassador Roach, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you. And I will be brief, because the purpose of what we're doing this afternoon is to hear, of course, from the candidates for the Council. I would, though, like to particularly thank the Slovakia and the Côte d'Ivoire for making this event possible, and as well the International Service for Human Rights and Amnesty International for their support. We're really proud to be supporting this event. And from an Australian perspective, we've always regarded membership of the Human Rights Council to be both a great honour, but also a great responsibility. And I think the international community does expect the highest standards from members of the Human Rights Council and from the candidates, therefore, who present themselves for election. In 2018, when Australia first served as a member of the Council, we led a joint statement called the Incoming Members Pledge. And we did this in March when we first joined, and we've done that every March subsequently, and we certainly look forward to leading that process next year. The pledge invites those candidates who are successful for election to the Human Rights Council to make commitments. And those commitments include to cooperate with the Human Rights Council and its procedures, to address human rights issues on their merits, to work in a spirit of reflection. And as we know, no state has a perfect human rights record, and that is why that spirit of self-reflection is important. And as part of that, during a term on the council to make real progress.
Can you please go on the English channel, because the interpreters cannot hear you. Please go on the English channel. Sorry.
I beg your pardon. I believed I was on the English channel.
Okay, it should be fine now. Thank you.
Is that fine now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll continue rather than repeat, because I think we do want to hear from candidates. Finally, the pledge does involve the commitment to avoid using procedural tactics to block debate, and I think that is really important as we look at a council that does indeed make meaningful progress for all of humanity in its work over the coming years. We really sincerely hope that all the candidates who are presenting themselves for election will strive towards these commitments, and we certainly invite successful candidates to join the incoming members' pledge when it comes to that moment in March next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Roach. We will now begin our discussion with the candidates, and each candidate was sent the same question in preparation for the event, and that is, what does the candidate state hope to achieve through its Human Rights Council membership, both at national and international level? As mentioned already, the candidates have 90 seconds to answer. And given the number of interventions that we do want to facilitate today, I really urge each state to please stay within that time limit. So we will proceed in alphabetical order. And first, I will give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina. Argentina has ratified or acceded to 13 out of 13 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. The country has been on the council before 2006 to 2007, 2009 to 2011, 2013 to 15, and 2019 to 21. And its ambassadors have in recent years been vice presidents twice. His Excellency, Mr. Federico Villegas, Permanent Representative of Argentina to the UN in Geneva, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be with all of you. The Council of Human Rights was created with three main goals: to give human rights the place they deserve in the UN system at the same level of peace and development, creating a main body; overcome the politicization that deteriorated the former Human Rights Commission established in the UPR, and continue serving as the main platform of the international community for the progressive development of international law and standards for the protection of human rights. Argentina is a country that was able to go from a tragic recent history of atrocities to the incorporation of human rights as a state policy that was able to overcome every political, social, and economic crisis, becoming part of our democratic identity. This story is very much linked to the work of this council through the treaty bodies, the special procedures, the work of the Office of the High Commissioner, and the resolutions adopted by the council, because those are used on a daily basis in my country to develop laws, public policies, and jurisprudence on human rights issues. This is the experience that we will bring into the council. If you elect Argentina to continue in the council, we will try to bring this rich experience to foster the strengthening of all the mechanisms, to foster the tools in order to avoid the politicization of the country. And we will bring this experience of building a bridge between our past and the future and foster new developments in the council, protecting the rights of LGBTI plus individuals, to include a gender perspective in the work of the council, to address the impact of business on human rights. Our commitments are there, you know them. I'll be very much willing to answer any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. Next, I was intending to invite the distinguished representative of Cameroon to take the floor, but I understand that there may be, they may not actually have entered yet here. Could you please, Your Excellency, Mr. Salman Ihet, if you're here, could you please let us know? I think we can, if they join in, we could then revert to them later. It seems that Cameroon is not present for now. So then we could go on, and I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Finland then to take the floor next. Finland has ratified or acceded to 11 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Finland has served on the Council once before, 2006 to 2007. His Excellency, Mr. Jukka Salovara, Permanent Representative of Finland to the UN in New York, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Assistant Secretary General Branskeris, and good morning in New York and good afternoon to Geneva. I want to thank the International Service for Human Rights, Amnesty International, and sponsoring countries for organizing this important dialogue with civil society and other countries and stakeholders. We support the inclusive participation of all to the work of the Human Rights Council. It is a great honor for me to represent Finland today. You know our pledges, and since time is limited, let me raise 3 issues that are of particular importance to Finland in all our policies and actions in international work. These points will anchor our action as a member of the Human Rights Council. Firstly, we will defend the universality of human rights. Finland is strongly committed to the rules-based international system, its obligations, and the universal and binding nature of human rights. Finland underlines the key role of the Human Rights Council in addressing both thematic and country-specific human rights issues. We will continue to give political and financial support to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We will work to stronger mainstream human rights across the UN system. Secondly, we will pay close attention to vulnerable groups. My country has a long tradition in promoting the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls in all their diversity. We will continue to do so also in the Human Rights Council. The rights of those in the most vulnerable situations always deserve our particular attention, including persons with disabilities, LGBTIQ+ persons, and indigenous peoples. Thirdly, we will work together with everyone. Finland pledges to cooperate in the Council with all stakeholders, including civil society. Achieving sustainable results requires joint efforts from us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salovara. Next, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Honduras to take the floor. Honduras has ratified or acceded to 13 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Honduras has not been on the Council before. His Excellency, Mr. Mario Alberto Fortin Midense, Permanent Representative of Honduras in Geneva, you have the floor.
You're on mute, Ambassador. Please unmute.
Gracias y gracias por la invitación. Honduras aspira a ser miembro del Consejo.
Invitation. Honduras would like to be a member of the Council, pledging to increase the dialogue and the transparency to protect human rights, especially those of groups that are vulnerable or that are affected due to climate change and the new challenges that COVID-19 is presenting. Each challenge that has been presented has been increasing during the past months, and we need to fight to make human rights a reality in this changing world. That's why Honduras demands the active participation of the civil society, as well as the one that human rights organizations and non-governmental organizations are working for. Our compromise is to project dialogue to protect social and cultural areas. And Honduras also would like to thank Australia and Cote d'Ivoire their presentation. And their organization here. We have been working through different volunteers and approaches, and this proves that they have been working really hard for human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fortin Medense. Now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Lithuania to take the floor. Lithuania has ratified or acceded to 12 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Lithuania has not been on the Council before. His Excellency Dr. Mantas Adomenas, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, you have the floor.
Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, dear colleagues, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to present Lithuania's vision for Council membership for the term 2022-24. Lithuania follows the principle no one should be left behind and no human right ignored, and promotes it in its own country, its region, and beyond. This year, Lithuania is proudly celebrating the 30th anniversary of the United Nations membership, as well as the 100th anniversary of the League of Nations. Over the 30 years of independence, Lithuania has worked tirelessly on implementing reforms based on respect for human rights and strong civil society. We continue to defend our principles in the face of diverse challenges like climate change, migration, advances of modern technologies, health emergencies, and others. If elected to the UN Human Rights Council, Lithuania will attach particular importance to the protection of human rights defenders, the rights of the child, the rights of persons with disabilities, and human rights in conflict areas. Furthermore, Lithuania commits to continue its activities in defending the rights of women and girls, freedom of expression, the safety of journalists, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, as well as freedom of religion and belief. Lithuania pledges to cooperate with non-governmental organizations actively and to encourage a regular dialogue of governments and the Council with civil society and human rights defenders. Let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister Adomenas. And next, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Luxembourg to take the floor. Luxembourg has ratified or acceded to 11 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Luxembourg was a member of the former Commission on Human Rights from 1998 to 2000, and is running for the membership of the Human Rights Council for the first time. His Excellency, Mr. Mark Bischler, Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to the UN in Geneva, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Sous-Secrétaire Générale. Merci aux organisateurs de ce pledging event. L'opportunité pour tous les États membres.
Thank you very much. The opportunity for all member states to serve on the Human Rights Council enhance the pertinence and the credibility of its action. The priorities of our action in the Council will be the same as those of our candidacy, which together with our voluntary pledge can be found on the website of our Foreign Ministry and European Affairs. Without the women and men fighting on a daily basis for their human rights, our efforts will be vain. Thus, we will step up to protect human rights defenders, journalists, and media freedom. If we ignore the effects of climate change on human rights, our efforts will not meet the challenge. Thus, we will implement our third National Action Plan on Sustainable Development, and in a spirit of international solidarity, we will maintain our official development assistance at least 1% of our gross national income. Without the respect of human rights of the most vulnerable, our offer will not be up to our ambitions. Therefore, we will legislate to protect the rights of anonymously born children and intersex children. Internationally, we will fight for gender equality, the rights of LGBTI persons, and we will plead for the effective participation of children and youth. We will not do it alone, but in dialogue and cooperation with other member states, actors from national and international civil society, and the representative of the UN system, first and foremost with the Office of the High Commissioner. I thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Ambassador Bichler. Next, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Malaysia to take the floor. Malaysia has ratified or acceded to 5 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Malaysia was a member of the Council twice, from 2007 to 2009 and from 2011 to 2013. His Excellency Dr. Ahmad Faisal Mohammed, Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the UN in Geneva, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Secretary General. Firstly, allow me to thank the main sponsors and organizers of this event. Malaysia remains unequivocally committed to advancing human rights for all. We truly believe that the HRC is an indispensable UN organ that has been effectively contributing to the protection and promotion of human rights globally. After 8 years of absence, Malaysia has decided to again seek Council membership, motivated by our desire to maintain human rights as an important national agenda. We also believe that membership in the HRC offers the valuable opportunity for Malaysia to contribute to the global human rights agenda, which has become even more crucial and challenging due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Towards that end, we are keen to work closely and constructively with all parties. If elected, Malaysia will endeavor to be the facilitator for conciliation, enabler for cooperation, and builder of consensus towards a more effective Human Rights Council. Malaysia's membership will be underpinned by the principles of inclusivity, cooperation, mutual respect, transparency, and accountability. We will strive to fulfill our pledges. Malaysia is cognizant that membership of this council brings great responsibility and expectation. I'm therefore at your disposal on any question regarding Malaysia's candidacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Faisal Mohammed. And next, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Montenegro to take the floor. Montenegro has ratified or acceded to 12 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Montenegro was a member of the Council once before, from 2013 to 2015. Her Excellency, Ms. Slavica Milacic, Permanent Representative of Montenegro to the UN in Geneva, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, esteemed host and co-sponsors of today's meeting, which we see also as a significant opportunity to further highlight the importance of close cooperation with civil society organizations as our indispensable partners. Let me point briefly some of the key voluntary pledges with the aim of actively promoting the principles of the universality, indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness of human rights. Also developing a genuine dialogue, understanding, tolerance, and cooperation based on respect for these principles and the international obligation to which the states have committed themselves. Supporting the close cooperation of the Council with all states, promoting international human rights law and international humanitarian law, and continuing to advocate for accountability for their violations and abuses. Supporting the further strengthening of the efficiency, performance, and impact of the Council on the ground, including its preventive role. Enhancing our participation in the Council work in addressing both thematic and country-specific issues. Continuing of an active advocacy for strengthening the financial sustainability of the ISHR, the Human Rights Council, and the treaty bodies. Placing a human rights-based approach at the heart of post-pandemic efforts to recover and build a more equal, just, inclusive, sustainable, green, and resilient societies. promoting and supporting participation, contribution, and interaction of civil society stakeholders within the UN human rights system. Domestically, very shortly, Montenegro will inter alia pledge to continue to regularly report to the UN treaty bodies and efficiently implement the recommendations it receives, and to continue to make effective use of the OHCHR's technical assistance in this regard, strengthening implementation of laws and policies for the protection and promotion of human rights, in particular of the vulnerable groups. We also remain committed to effectively combat all forms of discrimination and violence, including those based on SOGI, and finally developing an environment conducive to the protection and promotion of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression and freedom of media offline and online. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Milacic. And next, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Paraguay to take the floor. Paraguay has ratified or acceded to 13 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Paraguay was a member of the Council from 2015 to 2017, and its ambassador was a vice president of the Council in 2015. His Excellency, Mr. Julio Peralta, Deputy Permanent Representative of Paraguay to the UN in Geneva, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. En primer lugar, quisiera agradecer a los organizadores de este importante evento y en especial a la sociedad civil, que es la que nos permite.
I would like to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share our opinion, and we're convinced about the difference between the Human Rights Council and the nowadays Council, because now the civil society is participating. Paraguay will be a defender of these achievements. My country has been member from 2015 to 2017. During 2015, we were vice presidents of the council, and the permanent representative in that time was member of the situation group from 2016 to 2017. Firstly, in the membership, Paraguay wanted to increase the implementation of the recommendation of the universal mechanisms and regional mechanisms of human rights, which is linked to the view that we have to human rights. So the effectiveness will depend on the improvement of human rights in each of the countries. That's the reason why we have been introducing this subject, especially by the resolution of the implementation, presentation of records, and so on. We have cooperated with different states to increase their mechanism and improve their mechanism. We have improved thanks to this mechanism, and we have implemented our own mechanism. I will then answer to different questions that you may have about our next participation in the Council. Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite the distinguished representative of Qatar to take the floor. Qatar has ratified or acceded to 9 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Qatar has served on the Council 4 times, 2008 to 2010, 2011 to 2013, 2015 to 2017, and 2018 to 2020. His Excellency, Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador Al-Thani, Permanent Representative of Qatar to the UN in New York, you have the floor, please.
Many thanks, and I'm very much delighted to take part, of course, in this event organized by Amnesty International and other distinguished organizers to brief on Qatar's candidature for the membership of the Human Rights Council for the term 2022-2024. Respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights is a strategic choice underpinning the State of Qatar comprehensive reform process. It is highlighted as well in Qatar National Vision 2030, which encompasses a forward-looking policy that focuses on the rule of law, transparency, justice, and human dignity. Over the years, the country has adopted a wide range of groundbreaking measures with a view of mainstreaming human rights at the national level through the adoption and amendments of laws and regulations with a view to provide legal frameworks for the protection and promotion of human rights, which have been explained extensively in our document of voluntary pledges and commitments of the State of Qatar, submitted, of course, earlier this year in February, as enclosed in document A/76/67. Qatar believes in the Council as the Council to be the primary organ of the United Nations of upholding the rights of all peoples and in the interest of all states. Therefore, we must support its mandate and continue working through it. This is why Qatar put forward its candidacy for the membership of the Council for the term 2022-2024. And of course, when we assume the membership of the Council, we have pledged already at the national level to continue our progressive policy that promotes and protects human rights, especially the rights of women, girls, persons with disabilities, older persons, and migrant workers. We have pledged to continue to exceed international human rights instruments that we have not yet exceeded. We also have pledged to continue our progressive policy of amending laws to comply with international human rights obligations. We have pledged as well to widen our engagement with civil society organizations and all stakeholders. At the international level, we affirm that we will use our membership in the Human Rights Council to continue our constructive role in advancing human rights through transparent engagement with member states, human rights, and civil society organizations and all stakeholders. Maintaining, of course, the open invitation policy extended to all special procedures mandate holders and encourage other countries in the region to follow suit. Also continuing our engagement on the agenda items of the Council, including country-specific issues, questions of accountability, and thematic areas of interest such as the right to education in time of conflict and the effects of climate change. And of course, sharing our extensive experience in areas we have pioneered in the region, including the promotion and protection of the right of migrant workers. And I thank you again for this very, very important opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Al-Thani. I believe that we do not have the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates as we had initially planned. So I will, unless I'm mistaken, please let yourself be known. Otherwise, we now proceed, and I would like to invite now the distinguished representative of the United States to take the floor. The United States has ratified or acceded to 5 core international human rights treaties and related substantive protocols, and has not issued a standing invitation to UN special procedures. The United States served full terms twice, 2010 to 2012, 2013 to 2015. It was elected in 2017 for a 3rd term, but withdrew its membership in June 2018 and was replaced by Iceland at that time. Her Excellency, Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, Permanent Representative of the United States to the UN in New York, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for organizing this important event, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. From the first sentence of the UN Charter, the foundational unit of the United Nations is not just the nation state, but also the human being. And as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights makes clear, every human being is born free and equal in dignity and rights. But too often our inalienable rights are seen as optional aspirations. Systemic racism, regular targeting of the LGBTQIA+ community, and persistent discrimination against religious minorities, people with disabilities, indigenous people, and women and girls continues in every country around the world, including mine. The United States is committed to meeting our human rights obligations and ending discrimination in all its forms. We don't profess to be a perfect union, but our goal is to get more perfect, more just, each and every day. If elected as a member of the Human Rights Council, we will work to advance human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, and push back against blatant attempts to subvert the values upon which the UN is founded. Every individual is endowed with inalienable human rights, and states are obliged to protect those rights. If elected, the United States will work with the international community, including civil society, to make sure states do their duty, defend fundamental freedoms everywhere, and promote human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that I would like to thank the candidates for their responses, and this has then concluded the first part of the discussion. So now we will present some questions to candidates from the audience, and in order to make the best use of the time available, we kindly request that you send through concise questions to allow as many members of the audience as possible to contribute. And questions can be either of a general nature or asked of all candidates, or directed to specific candidates, as I mentioned earlier. Each candidate will be invited to respond to at least one question, and no candidate will be required to respond to more than 3 questions directed specifically to the candidates. Candidates have 2 and maximum 3 minutes to respond. So we have 5 questions from the audience in the first round. The first question here I will read out. I will take them in clusters then and read them out to you. So we will start with the first one, and we will reverse the alphabetical order that we started out with, so starting from the end. And we have then the first group of questions, and I will read out all of them to the countries in this round. The first one is to the USA, and that comes from the American Civil Liberties Union. Will the United States adopt a national plan of action to fully implement the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and take concrete steps to implement CERD and UPR recommendations to create a national human rights institution? Then the next question will be to Qatar from the MENA Rights Group. In its visit to Qatar in 2019, the working group, the WIGAD, urged Qatar to amend all laws that restrict the ability of civil society organizations to carry out their advocacy functions and monitoring of prisons. How does Qatar plan on removing such restrictions on the establishment and operations of civil society organizations? For Paraguay, a question from Amnesty Paraguay. What kind of indigenous land restitution mechanisms in line with human rights standards does Paraguay intend to adopt and promote? Will the state return its land to the Tecoja Sos indigenous community? And finally, in the first round, the final question is to Montenegro, and that comes from Legal Information Center for NGOs. Could you please outline how you engaged with independent civil society to formulate your human rights priorities and pledges, and how you plan to ensure that the invaluable views of civil society inform your position at the Human Rights Council, particularly with respect to communities and groups facing discrimination? So I will now give the floor back to Ambassador Thomas Greenfield for the first question addressed to the USA. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Ambassador Erica Barks-Ruggles. I am sitting in for Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, who has been called away to the Council with our apologies. Apologies for the switch. Thank you very much for the questions and for the important opportunity today. As far as the U.S. is concerned, on the question asked about a national plan of action and the recommendation to in the UPR, the U.S. takes very seriously our commitments and that we have undertaken in our pledging document, which you all have, to attack and really get at the root causes of racism, both at home and abroad. We believe that this is fundamentally a obligation of great nations such as ours, not to hide from our responsibilities on this issue, to acknowledge our shortcomings and to do our best to attack them and really get at the challenges that we see both at home and abroad. We have taken commitments in this administration to look at deeply our own racism issues here in the United States. Our Justice Department is in the process of investigating and prosecuting individuals, including police officers, who have violated civil rights and investigating those who have exhibited a pattern of abuse. We have also put in place an executive order looking at systemic racism in this country that is being driven by the federal government from the top, but also working with the state and local level authorities to get at these problems. We outlined this approach in our response in March to the UPR recommendations, and we remain committed to that fully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Barks-Ruggles. Now I turn to Ambassador Altani. If you would like me to repeat the question, please let me know, but otherwise we just proceed in the order. So, Madam Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. No, absolutely. I mean, a very important question, of course. And just let me say broadly that Qatar is one of the countries in the region that is very progressive in terms of widening the participation of civil society organizations, and we have a very much open policy towards human rights organizations visiting Qatar. I mean, we have hosted many functions. Just to give an example, our National Committee on Human Rights have actually engaged very much extensively with human rights organizations, and we had many annual functions relating to their role and the importance of the role, and even encouraging other countries in the regions to do the same. So in terms of the recommendations by the working group, absolutely, I think we are doing very well in terms, we're progressing very well with the engagement with civil society organizations. We are encouraging to have more local civil society organizations at the ground. As you know, Qatar is preparing for the first ever elections of the Shura Council. So there is a lot that the civil society organization can do to promote such a process. So, but I'm happy as well to engage with certain organizations who would like to also engage with us directly at the mission, and we can as well give specific information to them directly on any concerns on that matter. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ambassador Altani. And then we turn to the question was to Paraguay. So Ambassador Peralta, the floor is yours. Again, if you would like me to repeat the question, I can. Otherwise, please take the floor.
Muchas gracias. Sí, en cuanto a la pregunta que hemos recibido, que guarda relación la...
Thank you so much. Regarding the question that is regarding the indigenous people of Paraguay, this is a subject that concerns not only the government, but also to society in its whole, because it's a debt that we have with indigenous people. With the pass of time and of the different governments, we have thought of finding the best implementation or the best policy concerning the restitution of lands. In any case, this is a path that we are now walking in, and we are finding the perfect way to walk in this path. Regarding this aspect, we have recently approved a national plan of indigenous people in which one of the main edges is landing and natural resources. So that would be our roadmap, and we are debating this with the different indigenous people. As I have mentioned before, this is a path that we need to follow, and this is a debt that we actually have with indigenous people. We will continue fulfilling this. We hope that during the Human Rights Council we receive the different recommendation from civil organizations and indigenous people to see how we can cooperate and work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So now the floor will go to Montenegro. Ambassador Milacic, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for highlighting the importance of the question, which highlights again the importance of cooperation with the civil society's representatives in our I think future engagement in the second term of the Human Rights Council. Let me first of all emphasize that our priorities and our pledges and commitments with the Human Rights Council corresponds with our national reform agenda, which is additionally reinforced by the ongoing accession process of Montenegro to the European Union. And representatives of NGOs are actively involved not only in drafting the legislation, policy, and strategies, but also some of them are a member for some negotiating charter with the European Union. And also it has been already established practice in Montenegro based on the previous, our experience during the first mandate in the Human Rights Council, including the representatives of the civil society, not only in drafting our midterm report, but also in a process of the UPR in as such. And finally, when it comes maybe to greater engagement of our mission here in Geneva, I think that these now online platform provide additional possibilities to consult on different issues. And personally, I have had a lot of experience in my previous professional engagement, mostly dealing with the EU integration process of Montenegro, either in Podgorica or in Brussels. And I have really on this occasion also to underline the extraordinary contribution of the representatives of the Montenegrin civil society, which is quite developed, in particular having in mind the size of the country, and quite active in drafting at first place the national action plan for fulfilling the given criteria. And it was quite a demanding task of 500 benchmarks and sub-benchmarks to implement in a very short period, but also in monitoring the implementation and transparency. So I think there is enough room. It's obvious we can do better, and we can always improve the mechanism of cooperation, but I'm very much optimistic and positive about also the good cooperation and contribution of Montenegrin civil society in making our contribution most valuable and engagement was visible, which should be important also from both for the domestic level, but also international efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. So now we go on to our round 2 of questions. And here we will be putting questions from the audience to Malaysia, to Luxembourg, and to Lithuania. And I will now read out those questions. To Malaysia first, from Civicus. What steps will you take to ensure that commitments to protect civic space at the international level are also implemented at the national level, especially concerning legislation that criminalizes freedom of expression and freedom of assembly? The question to Luxembourg will be from Organic Farming for Gorillas, Cameroon. Which actions and measures are considered by Luxembourg to be necessary to further update and promote its 2018 recommendations on how the Human Rights Council presidency and the Bureau could address reprisals against civil society and human rights defenders? And the question to Lithuania is actually combining 2 similar questions. So what steps is Lithuania taking to improve the rights and well-being of its LGBTQIA+ citizens? And will Lithuania commit as a first step to repeal the so-called propaganda law and work to advancing LGBTI plus rights at home as well as worldwide? So now I then turn, again, we're doing the reverse order here. So I am turning to Ambassador Faisal Mohammed for the answer from Malaysia. Please, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Civicus, for that very important question. At the outset, I would like to reiterate that human rights and the related freedoms are guaranteed under the Malaysian Constitution, and the implementation and the practice of these rights and freedom are further strengthened and protected through our national legislations and a robust institution, including our judiciary. These acts are actually exist to enable our citizens to exercise the rights and freedom responsibly and not to suppress them. So they can exercise all these rights within the ambit of our national laws, which is, like many countries in the world, is very important, especially in the context of multiracial and multi-religious society like ours. This approach has proven to be successful for Malaysia, which is well known around the world to be a very peaceful, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And we also have a very diverse and a robust media landscape in the country. We have more than 170,000 associations, 66 political parties registered with the Registrar of Society, and they represent a wide and diverse range of identities, views, and priorities. Nevertheless, the government is cognizant of the need to continuously review these acts to make sure that they continue to be efficient, they continue to be relevant, and in line with international standards. For example, we've had the amendment to the Peaceful Assembly Act 2012 in 2019 to provide more freedom to the public to conduct peaceful assembly. And at the moment, I can share with Civicus and other CSOs that the government is also in the midst of amending the Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission Act 1998 and the Communication and Multimedia Act 1998. So I think on this call, we will continue to work with our partners, including the CSOs, and take a whole of society approach to further safeguard and improve the enjoyment of the freedoms that were raised by Civicus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And now the question to Luxembourg. So the floor is yours, Ambassador Bichler, for the question put to Luxembourg.
Thank you very much, Madam ASG. First of all, thank you for the question from the Cameroonese NGO. The short answer to the question is reprisals are never acceptable, but please allow me to elaborate a little bit on that. From Luxembourg, we will continue to speak out against reprisals targeting civil society, and we will do so together with our friends and colleagues and partners from the Benelux countries. The reporting of the civil society and from human rights defenders is indeed essential to the work of the Human Rights Council in our eyes. And together with the UN special procedures, they really constitute what we would call the eyes and ears of the intergovernmental human rights for the Council and the General Assembly as well. Luxembourg considers that it is crucial that human rights defenders can participate without fear of reprisals in the work of the Council. And together with the Benelux countries, Luxembourg represents regular statements on the Human Rights Council in order to call on countries to stop the reprisals against civil society. And it is for us essential that the Council does not stay silent on that issue. We will work with independent NGOs around the world and in Geneva to ensure that their voices and the voices of those that they protect are heard in the Council, and we will continue advocating for human rights defenders in our bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, as well as through the European Union. We will also continue to support efforts by ISHR and other NGOs for capacity building of civil society in countries in the global south, especially through our with our development cooperation partner countries. And finally, we would, of course, also fully support the role of the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council President in calling out and pushing back against all reprisals targeting human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bišlev. And now we have the question to Lithuania. So I would be happy to give the floor now to Dr. Adomenas for the answer to those questions. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much for these important questions regarding LGBTI plus rights. Well, first of all, I have to say that we will continue to cherish the values of human rights and dignity, taking into consideration the expectations of every individual and making appropriate decisions. As you know, Lithuania is a state party to major human rights treaties, and a lot of attention has been given to progress on the implementation of recommendations addressed to Lithuania during the periodic review and other United Nations human rights protection mechanisms. Furthermore, legalization of same-sex civil union, or in other words, civil partnership, is going to be discussed in the Parliament at the end of the current year. It's included in the Parliament agenda. When it comes to the second linked question, in Lithuania we have the law on the protection of minors against the detrimental effect of public information, as it's officially called. It was adopted in 2002 and amended recently in order to define the criteria for public information that may have negative impact on the mental health, physical, mental, or moral development of minors, as well as the rights, duties, and responsibilities of journalists and the institutions that supervise their activities. For example, information that is considered as having negative impact on minors includes bullying on the grounds of sexual orientation, as well as other similar grounds. However, there is another provision in this law which may raise some doubts. Information that has a negative impact on minors includes information that despises family values, promotes a different concept of marriage and family formation than it is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Lithuania, as well as the Civil Code of Lithuania. However, in 2019, the Constitutional Court of Lithuania decided that the concept of family is gender neutral in Lithuania, and of course, our constitution also prohibits discrimination on all grounds, including sexual orientations. So this law could not have been implemented in practice to restrict public information in respect to these provisions regarding family values. Also, there are some complaints which are being considered by the courts of law in Lithuania. So we're going to wait for the decisions of those courts and make necessary amendments, if necessary, to implement the decisions of the courts in question. But the important thing is that the decisions of Constitutional Court do not allow to apply this law in the restrictive sense, which raises most worries for the estimable defenders of LGBTI plus rights.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Minister. So now we go on to a third round of questions, and I will be putting questions from the audience to Honduras, to Finland, and to Argentina. So I now read them out. To Honduras, the question is from Asociación para una Ciudadanía Participativa. What immediate actions are planned to reduce the systematic violation of human rights in the country? Criminalization, forced disappearance, usurpation of territories, forced displacement of indigenous groups, femicide, excessive use of force, abuse of authority, selective assassinations, among others. The question to Finland comes from Amnesty Finland. Finland's pledge consists of many highly relevant commitments, including defending universality of human rights, paying special attention to rights of women and marginalized groups, and addressing country situations. Will Finland lead by example and take urgent action to reform legislation on legal gender recognition, the so-called Trans Act, on which Finland has received numerous international recommendations, including in the UPR process? And the question to Argentina is from CELS. In your view, which would be the priority issues for the Council to work on, considering the COVID-19 crisis and its social impact in Latin America and the rest of the world? So now the floor would then go to Honduras, Ambassador Fortin Medense, to answer the question put to Honduras. Please, the floor is yours.
Gracias. Agradezco.
Thank you. The question is very interesting for me because it gives me the opportunity to explain myself. Honduras is always pointed as a violent country, and it's a fact that we can deny. And during our last decade, we have been decreasing this violence, and we have been developing laws to make a better country. That's why with the unit that we have in Honduras, we have been working not only with the topics that we have pointed and different communities, but also that it allows us to work on different topics that are not even wondered in the question. Sorry, I think my connection was cut. I was saying that our work is not only to seek the construction of all of these points, but also to construct a more inclusive and safer Honduras for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And now we turn to the question to Finland. So please, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Assistant Secretary General. And you all know that the Finnish government is strongly committed in safeguarding the rights of all LGBTQ persons. And we provide considerable support to LGBTIQ persons and groups living in difficult situations around the world, both financial and political support. But I really have to take this question with humility and acknowledge that the situation is far from perfect in Finland. But a working group is now preparing a legislative proposal regarding transgender persons, and the government aims to submit its proposal to Parliament in the spring of 2022, so early next year. The new legislation will strengthen the fulfillment of individuals' rights to self-determination required by international human rights agreements. And Finland will take into account the views of international human rights bodies as well as the international and domestic human rights organizations during the drafting process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salovara. And now then we have the question to Argentina. So Ambassador Villegas, please, the floor is yours for the question put to Argentina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Very important in this time. First of all, we have the Council. The priority should have a parallel approach. The first one is systemic, because the COVID pandemic here in Geneva has shown us that international organizations cannot work by themselves. They have to work together. So the priority of the Human Rights Council should be to mainstream in all international organizations in Geneva that are addressing the COVID a human rights perspective in order to address the pandemic. And the other approach that we should have as a priority, all actors and stakeholders, is the substantive approach within the Council on the human rights perspective. And in that sense, Argentina, of course, supported the resolution that we approved and co-sponsored on ensuring equitable, affordable, timely, and universal access for all countries to vaccines that was proposed by Ecuador. And of course, we supported at the same time, going back to the systemic approach, we supported in WTO, for example, the waiver on intellectual property in order to have a more equitable access to vaccines. So we need to move forward in this sense and address the vulnerability, structural vulnerability that has been shown through the pandemic on a specific group of persons, for example, older persons that do not have an international instrument specifically for them for the protection of their rights. And the COVID, unfortunately, with the life of real people, we saw the vulnerability they had. So for addressing this pandemic and for the future pandemics, we should have and reinforce a human rights perspective so that a human rights approach is the base of addressing, hopefully very far from now, the next pandemic and overcome the one that we're going through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. So now, before we proceed with the next round of questions for the candidates present, I would like to read out some questions for states not in attendance that we have received. So they go on record, and as we mentioned earlier, these will be submitted actually to the states for a chance to answer. So one question is to Cameroon from Human Rights Watch, asks how Cameroon belongs at the Human Rights Council when the government tries to eviscerate the political opposition, crush dissent, and persecute LGBT people, and its security forces fighting separatists in Anglophone regions commit human rights abuses with impunity and no international accountability. To Eritrea, from Joseph Alafak on Twitter, will you establish prompt, thorough, independent, impartial, and effective investigations into the alleged violations, breaches of IHL, international humanitarian law, and or international human rights law? Will you commit to respect the norms and principles of international humanitarian law? To India, from Genoveva Sotirova, how can India keep women safe from domestic violence and ensure access to education, healthcare, as well as support to widowed women? To Somalia, from Joseph Alafak on Twitter, will Somalia commit to finalize the ratification of or accession to the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict, signed by Somalia in 2005, and align domestic legislation with international norms? And finally, to UAE, from Democracy for the Arab World Now, Don Mena, how will UAE authorities release Abdul Salam al-Marzouki, Ahmed Massour, Mohammed al-Roken, and Nasser bin Gait, along with the many other human rights activists and UAE citizens that continue to endure unjust imprisonment? But now I will go to round two with the groupings of questions again, as we have. So again, we will now reverse the order and do the alphabetical one from the beginning. So we will have Argentina, Finland, Honduras, and Lithuania in the first group of questions. So I will now start again, Your Excellency, Ambassador Villegas, with a question to Argentina, but I will read out, as I did all the questions, one after the other. The question to Argentina is from the French mission: how do candidate countries intend to promote the protection of human rights defenders, both at the national level and within the Council? To Finland, from Joseph Alafak on Twitter, will you commit to repeal blasphemy law in the criminal code and respect and advocate for freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. To Honduras from Human Rights Watch, what can we expect from Honduras as a member if it abstained from voting on an OAS resolution condemning the egregious human rights abuses committed by the Ortega regime in Nicaragua, which have been documented by OHCHR? And to Lithuania, what are your plans to mainstream and advance child rights at the Human Rights Council? So back to you again, Ambassador Villegas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Well, the main thing that we can do to protect human rights defenders is a cultural change that we have to do from the Council, which is to understand that we wouldn't have a Council of Human Rights if it weren't for the human rights defenders of all over the world. They have been the force, the driving force for the progressive development of human rights. And in the case of my country, of course, the best that the Argentine society, the social tissue, was able to produce is precisely the Argentine human rights movement that has been very much linked to the universal system in the past and has been a driving force for the development of human rights. So besides the cultural change, we need to put the human rights defenders as part of the solution to address human rights in the countries and in the dialogue, and to understand that public policies, jurisprudence, laws on human rights cannot be done from the state, by the state only, if we don't have the voice of human rights defenders. So we need a cultural change, and we need a systematic technical cooperation from the Council to all countries to develop this new culture of addressing human rights policies and laws with the help at the side of the human rights defenders, and not to see them as enemies, because we wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And now I turn to Ambassador Salovara for the question to Finland. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary General. And of course, the Finnish constitution protects human rights, including freedom of expression and freedom of religion and belief. But on the blasphemy laws, Finland has received a recommendation from the Human Rights Committee on this issue sort of in March. And we maintain a constructive dialogue with the UN treaty bodies, and we'll also review this recommendation as part of a broader assessment of the implementation of our human rights obligations. So this issue is under review and will be given very careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we then turn to the question to Honduras. So again, the floor is yours, Ambassador Fortín Medanza.
Gracias. La situación de...
Thank you. The situation in Central America is very complex, and it's a situation where different countries need to communicate. We saw a similar situation in the 80s, and it's now again a complicated moment. For this reason, in our country, what we are looking for is a constructive dialogue that allows Central America to accept the challenges that are given and to fight for them. Thank you.
Ambassador, and now we turn to Vice Minister Adomenas for the question to Lithuania. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Well, Lithuania places particular emphasis on protection of children. Due to the pandemic, worldwide school closures and tens of millions of children home, millions do not have access to digital or broadcast remote learning opportunities, lack food and health services, including access to vaccines against other diseases, as well as COVID. In addition, there has been a significant increase in domestic violence against children. So Lithuania pledges to encourage a better implementation of the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and its protocol, seeking to achieve that the rights of the child should be comprehensively protected and children should be safe in all circumstances of their life. as well as should not experience violence, bullying, or abuse. Currently, during this particularly difficult time, Lithuania is holding the presidency of the UNICEF Executive Board and will continue to be in the UNICEF Executive Board for a 3-year period until 2022. Lithuania's presidency in UNICEF focuses on protecting children's rights and well-being, mitigating the negative consequences of COVID-19 on children worldwide, as well as distance learning, the use of new technology and innovations to promote children's well-being, the prevention of bullying, keeping children safe in cyberspace, and ensuring equal opportunities for girls and children with disabilities. We will also support other countries' efforts in defending children's rights in the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Minister. And now we then turn to our second group of questions in the second round, and those will be to Luxembourg, to Malaysia, and to Montenegro. So I read out the questions. To Luxembourg from the Liechtenstein mission: ensuring accountability for human rights violations should be a priority for all states, especially Human Rights Council members. The support of the ACT Code of Conduct is an important factor for Liechtenstein's support of a candidature, in addition to its human rights record, pledges, and commitments. To what extent are you prioritizing strengthening accountability and supporting the ACT Code of Conduct? To Malaysia, it is from the Indonesian mission. As we know, climate change has been a relatively overlooked issue in the Human Rights Council. We would like to ask Malaysia, as a member of the Human Rights Council, does Malaysia plan to put forward any initiatives in the context of climate change and human rights? And the question to Montenegro from Outright International is: the Human Rights Council continues to be a vital resource for LGBTI communities to bring visibility to the human rights violations they face based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression and sex characteristics. However, questions related to LGBTI persons are also, unfortunately, highly politicized at the Council. How would the candidates presented today ensure that politics does not get in the way of promoting and protecting the human rights of LGBTI persons? So I then turn to Ambassador Bichler for the question to Luxembourg. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. And thank you for Liechtenstein for this question on accountability, coherence, and transparency. During Luxembourg's membership in the Security Council back in 2013-14, we supported the ACT, the Accountability, Coherence, and Transparency Code of Conduct actively, and we will do the same, of course, if elected to the Human Rights Council. And this goes by sharing information with all member states, as well as keeping open communication channels with the civil society and all human rights mechanisms. On accountability specifically, I would also like to mention that we deal with this question as very active members of two group of friends here in Geneva, the group of friends, and in New York, by the way, a group of friends on responsibility to protect, and also in the group of friends on the ICC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And now we turn then to Malaysia. Ambassador Faisal Muhammad, the floor is yours for the question to Malaysia.
Thank you so much, Madam Assistant Secretary General. And thank you to our colleagues of the Indonesian delegation for this very, very important question. Malaysia recognizes that climate change is the biggest existential threat to mankind. Our commitment is reflected in the creation of the Malaysian Climate Change Action Council in 2021. We feel that there is an urgent need to intensify global efforts to tackle the adverse effects of climate change. Malaysia is committed to make human rights and climate change as a priority at the HRC if elected. We understand that the adverse effects of climate change can erode the enjoyment of human rights, particularly of those vulnerable groups. For example, women, children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. Such issues have actually been discussed at the HRC. For example, the panel discussion on the rights of persons with disabilities in the context of climate change during HRC 46. In addition, the OHCHR had conducted an analytical study on gender-responsive climate action for the full and effective enjoyment of human rights of women. So Malaysia wants to encourage more studies and discussions on the negative impacts of climate change to human rights. In this connection, we also support the establishment of a special rapporteur on climate change. We strongly believe that having a special mandate on climate change would enhance the role of Human Rights Council in tackling the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And now for the question to Montenegro, I am glad to give the floor to Ambassador Milacic again, please.
Thank you very much. Actually, when we put forward one as our priority pledges, a commitment for the Human Rights Council, also at a national level, was to try to contribute through dialogue, understanding and tolerance and cooperation, better understanding what really means the universal nature of the human rights and invisibility, interdependence and interrelatedness of human rights, and human rights for all, as we are born equal to all with the right for the same right and the dignity. Montenegro has been also should share the positive, some positive experience and the practices and some crucial achievement in this regard, although still has a lot to be done, in particular concerning the changing the mindset of the environment, in particular the traditional societies. But I'm really proud that Montenegro is among the first countries that last year enacted, actually the Parliament of Montenegro has enacted the law on the life partnership of persons of the same sex in July 2020. And within the 1 year period, I think it has been developed the necessary bylaws for efficient implementation, because this summer we learned that the two couple of the same sex were making the marriage, actually this concluded this life partnership in Montenegro. So I think it's obvious one of the way how can contribute to reducing the politicization or misunderstanding of these human rights is also by sharing our positive experience and to leading by doing by our experience and example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. And now I would like to turn to the third group of questions in the second round, and those will go to Paraguay, to Qatar, and to the United States. So the question to Paraguay is from Amnesty Paraguay. If successful in being elected to the Human Rights Council, would Paraguay reconsider the Ministry of Education's resolution that bans teaching on gender equality and prohibits teachers from providing comprehensive sexuality education? To Qatar, from Migrant Rights, will Qatar recognize and act against human trafficking for forced labor and ensure prosecution of those who abet the crime and not prosecute victims of trafficking? And to the United States of America, from Human Rights Watch, if the US is again elected to the UN Human Rights Council, will it commit to scrutinizing abuses by friends and foes alike? And will it commit to allowing its own rights record, including racism and other problems, to be thoroughly scrutinized? So I am now giving the floor for the question to Paraguay to Ambassador Peralta. Please, the floor is yours.
Sí, muchas gracias y también
Thank you so much. I would like to thank the fact that this question has been asked. It's very important to bring to the debate sexual education in Paraguay. As a future member of Council of Human Rights, and based on the experience that we had in the last period as presidents of the council and members of the council, we will promote that this fact is debated in the council, and we will carry on initiatives that have to do with this subject. We think that the Human Rights Council, it's an open forum in which we can debate every type of divide. Internally, we will promote this debate as well in the constitutional framework and in the public policy framework of Paraguay. I would like to mention something that is not in the question, but it's important to underline nevertheless. Next presidency, the Human Rights Council in 2020 will be in Brula, in a country of Brula, and it's important to take into account this because we need to know what they will do regarding sexual education. Thank you so much.
And now for the question to Qatar, I will give the floor to Ambassador Al-Thani. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and again for a very important question. And let me mention, of course, when in terms of presenting laws that address combating human trafficking, I want to refer to the Act, to the Law Number 5 of 2020, amending certain provisions of Act Number 15 of 2011 on combating human trafficking, and this is one of the progress achieved at the legal level when it comes to combating human trafficking. And of course, we have established in Qatar the National Committee to Combating Human Trafficking in June 2017 to ensure the enforcement of the Human Trafficking Act and coordinating the efforts of entities working to prevent human trafficking, raising awareness of the means of human trafficking, and exchanging information and expertise with Arab and international organizations involved in the fight against human trafficking. The committee approved as well the national plan on combating human trafficking for the period 2017-2022, which serves as the charter for the committee and for relevant entities. So I just wanted to make sure that those who have asked the question to also revert to our document of pledges and commitments that explains extensively how Qatar has progressed when it comes to combating human trafficking, including, of course, supporting UN entities, the United Nations Fund for combating human trafficking, especially of women and children, which Qatar is one of the top donors towards.
Thank you, Ambassador Al-Thani. So we now turn to the United States for the question put to it. And so Ambassador Barks-Ruggles, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Human Rights Watch for their important question. Part of the reason the United States is running for the Human Rights Council, and if elected, is that we believe that every nation must be scrutinized for their human rights record, including our own. This is a fundamental principle on which the Human Rights Council is founded and on which the UN itself is founded, that every country has responsibilities as well as rights within the system, and that every individual has inalienable and recognized rights to have their human rights protected. Those include the rights to freedom of religion and belief, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, all of which we are committed to supporting. But also, we have obligations as states to combat racism, to promote the rights of women and children and minority groups, which have oftentimes been ignored. And we must scrutinize and ensure that our business communities are participating in promoting human rights in their own practices, fighting corruption, fighting trafficking, and making sure that the rights of their individual laborers are also respected. We are committed to all of these. They are part of our pledge, and we will work to the best of our ability, not only in the Human Rights Council, but in everything that we do as a core commitment of our human rights policy as articulated by President Biden, as well as Secretary Blinken. to ensure that we are upholding our own commitments. That means opening ourselves up to scrutiny, admitting when we have shortcomings, and tackling those shortcomings honestly and in partnership with our friends, our allies, with civil society, with our private sector, and with the UN and the UN rapporteurs. I would like to also note that on July 13th, Secretary Blinken announced that the United States will be issuing an invitation to all UN experts, an open invitation to come to the United States. Because of COVID restrictions, obviously that is more difficult right now, but that open invitation is there. And I just wanted to correct the record because I think that that gets at exactly what the heart of this question was. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Barth-Ruggles. So now I will, again, for the record, put questions that we have received to the states not in attendance, and they will, of course, be transmitted to them. To Cameroon, from Jan Capel, what measures have been taken by the Cameroon government to ensure national investigations and accountability on allegations of intimidation and reprisals against human rights defenders for their cooperation with the United Nations? The latest, which is the 2020 UN Annual Report on Reprisals for Cooperation with the UN, A/HRC/45/36, covers allegations of reprisals against 5 human rights defenders and 1 journalist. To Eritrea, from Human Rights Watch, Eritrean troops have committed atrocities in Tigray, including massacres of Tigrayan civilians and abuses against Eritrean refugees. Human Rights Council members should be willing to hold those responsible for abuses, including those in positions of command responsibility, to account. Will Eritrea be willing to support credible international investigations and accountability in this regard? What steps has Eritrea taken, if any, in this regard? To Kazakhstan, from Human Rights Watch, Kazakhstan's government claims it's pursuing a human rights agenda, yet serious restrictions of free speech, assembly, and association persist. Government critics are convicted and increasingly jailed on overbroad criminal charges. With a seat on the council, will that change? To Somalia, Somalia's federal authorities have failed to pass important legislation around sexual offenses which hamper the fight against widespread sexual violence. Can Somalia pledge to do this during the first year of membership? To UAE, Democracy for the Arab World Now, Don Mena, puts the question, what steps have UAE officials taken to ensure well-documented allegations of torture and ill treatment in UAE prisons and UAE-operated prisons in Yemen are investigated and that prisoners are protected from such abuse? And now we have still some time, which is the good news, and we're going to turn to the third round of questions, again reversing the alphabetical order. And in the third round, we have the first group of questions that will go to the USA, to Qatar, and to Paraguay. So to the USA, from Munir Majie, Community Action Center, Al-Quds University. The question is, how will the US foreign policy implement the pledges expressed with regard to the Israeli policies and discriminatory laws applied against Palestinians in general and in East Jerusalem in particular? The annexation of East Jerusalem was condemned by many Human Rights Council members, and yet the American embassy was moved to Jerusalem in 2018. How will the USA contribute to fulfilling the many resolutions of the UN bodies regarding the unlawful annexation of East Jerusalem? To Qatar, from Don Mena, what tangible steps are Qatari authorities taking to remove prohibitive restrictions towards recognizing and strengthening women's rights? For example, how is the Qatari government addressing impediments to women exercising their autonomy and enjoying their right to health, such as requiring the permission of a male guardian or a marriage certificate before providing health care to adult women? and steps to end discriminatory provisions in personal family laws that deprive Qatari women of equal rights in divorce, child custody, and inheritance. To Paraguay, from Amnesty Paraguay, would Paraguay ratify the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights if elected to the Human Rights Council? So for the questions to the United States, again, the floor is yours, Ambassador Barksworth.
Thank you very much. As has been articulated numerous times by both President Biden and Secretary Blinken, as well as other members of the US government, the United States supports a two-state solution in which both the Israelis and the Palestinians live in peace, dignity, and with their rights fully respected. We believe that it is important to scrutinize every country's human rights record, as I just said in the previous round of questions. But we do believe that it is unfair that the Council and other UN bodies have continued to target Israel to the extent that it does, including having a separate agenda item, permanent item number 7, that only targets Israel, and this is the only country that has a permanent agenda item. We have pledged to work to ensure equal scrutiny of all countries' records and the upholding of rights of individuals, regardless of where they live or under what their nationality is or under what government they happen to be living. We believe that those individual rights are indivisible and universal, and we will continue to uphold that principle in all of our actions in the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Barksworth. And now on to the question to Qatar. So the floor is yours, Ambassador Al-Thani.
Many thanks for the question. Of course, I just want to also confirm that the Qatari constitution gives equal rights to both women and men, and that includes, of course, the right to health, the right to education, the right to work, and when it comes to political and economic empowerment as well. And of course, when it comes to education, Qatar is considered one of the countries has progressed when it comes to women education. 70% of the graduates in the state of Qatar are women, and the women constitute 49% of the workforce in the state of Qatar. So the women in Qatar has very much progressed in terms of gaining the rights politically, economically, and socially. I would really say that there is importance to look at various reports that have been submitted by the state of Qatar. For example, Qatar has exceeded the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and have progressed in terms of presenting reports signifying the progress that has achieved by women in the state of Qatar. We are very much proud to be as well the first woman ambassador to be appointed to the United Nations, both in Geneva and New York, and I can signal that there is a lot of interest by the government to provide more platform for women and girls as well. So please, again, I'm reverting to look at our report submitted to the report on the pledges and commitments that extensively as well explain how far we have gone in terms of political, economic, and social rights for women. And I thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Al-Thani. And so now the floor will go for the question to Paraguay, to Ambassador Peralta. Please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias y también nuevamente agradecido por esta
interesante. Again, for this interesting question. It also has to do with the country's capacities regarding the ratification of instruments, of international instruments, especially in human rights. Paraguay has received a recommendation regarding the periodical exams in order for Paraguay to be part of instruments regarding the optional instrument. He is part of the Pact of Social, Economical, and in the last exam, he received the recommendation of ratifying this protocol. We are now analyzing, and of course, being this internal tramit, we have to consider all the details in order to see if we will ratify this protocol. We have an institutional group that is working in beyond, and it's the responsible organism to give the answer to this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Peralta. And now we are going to the second group of questions in this round, and those will go to Montenegro, to Malaysia, and to Luxembourg. So I will read them out again. The question to Montenegro is from Eric Richardson. What is your position on the participation of civil society in the meetings and informal negotiations of the Council? During COVID, civil society's participation has been severely restricted, more so than at any other time in the Council's history. Links for informal negotiations which take place online are not publicly posted. NGOs are not permitted to enter the plenary room unless they're giving a speech. And during the recent special session on Afghanistan, there were time periods where no civil society was present due to the webcast shutting down and the ban on civil society's attendance in person. If elected, would you reverse these trends and maximize the opportunities for civil society to participate in all meetings of the Human Rights Council? The question to Malaysia comes from Forum Asia. Following the last elections, Malaysia pledged to push for the ratification of at least 6 international human rights treaties. It initiated a process to ratify 2 treaties, conventions, ISHR and the Rome Statute, without success. What is Malaysia's current plan for the ratification of key human rights treaties? And then the question to Luxembourg comes from Civicus. What are the steps you will take to ensure full NGO participation in the Council, its mechanisms and resolutions, and to engage with national and international civil society as a Council member? So I will now give the floor for the question to Montenegro to Ambassador Milacic. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I already underlined the importance we attach actually to active participation, contribution, interaction with the civil society. And my understanding was that I already arrived when COVID-19 lockdown was introduced, and my experience in cooperation within the Human Rights Council and a lot of meetings also of internal consultation for the President Bureau and others is that actually, in a principle, there is general support to return to the inclusiveness of NGOs in the work of the Human Rights Council, as one as the COVID-19 restrictions allowed it. So my understanding was that mostly the restriction and changing the practices in this COVID-19's work of functioning via Zoom and internet platform was the reason for introducing the restriction and reducing the cooperation of the NGOs. Myself, as well as some other colleagues, has been, I would say quite usually, raised this question and looking forward for the time we can return what used to be the business as usual before the COVID-19 and the situations, I would say even additionally complicated because of the ongoing reconstruction work within the UN facilities. So also there is a problem of the available room to host all member states and also NGOs in the line with the COVID-19 restriction to be followed. So let's hope first of all for the this reason to be at least reduced, and certainly we will continue to raise this issue in our ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ilacic. So the question now goes to Malaysia, and I give the floor to Ambassador Faisal Mohammed. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Secretary General, and thank you, Forum Asia, for this important question. Malaysia remains committed to accede to all core human rights treaties and other related covenants. But based on our past experience, we understand that it's crucially important to take a pragmatic approach. Most importantly, we need to educate the public on the importance and the relevance of the treaties and the consequences of ratifying them. This is vital to ensure accurate understanding of the exercise at the grassroots level, to minimize misinformation, manipulation, and politicization of the issue. As part of this initiative, the government of Malaysia has partnered with OHCHR to translate the 9 core human rights treaties into our national language, Bahasa Malaysia, as an effort to increase awareness, public awareness, and understanding of the treaties, and encourage discourse, public discourse on the treaties. And we encourage civil society to also work closely with the government towards realizing this very important goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Faisal Mohammed. And now the question was to Luxembourg, the last one in this group of questions. So Ambassador Bichler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. To guarantee and to protect the civic space, especially for NGOs, of course, is one of the priorities of our candidature, and will be also one of our main concerns during our mandate if elected in the Human Rights Council. Maybe I can distinguish between what we're doing nationally and internationally, and also on how we do it. So nationally, we have an ongoing discussion with the national human rights institutions, of course, and also with the very active civil society and human rights NGOs in Luxembourg, several dozens of NGOs that take part in an interministerial committee where they meet regularly every 2 months with the representatives both of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but then also with the representatives of all other sectoral ministries that deal with human rights issues. We also invite, and then I come to the international part of it, we invite national NGOs also to take part in meetings that we have here in Geneva, but also in New York. With Geneva-based organizations, we ever so often organize side events during the sessions of the Human Rights Council. And we, between these sessions, we keep up an ongoing bilateral exchange with these NGOs. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we listen. And we listen to independent NGOs based here in Geneva, but also, of course, around the world, and especially also at home. Then we speak out together with them to protect the civil society space. And we will continue also our consulting the civil society and the national human rights institutions, as I said, through our Interministerial Committee for Human Rights. Last but not least, we also will always take into account and listen to NGOs in the framework of the negotiations of resolutions here in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bichler. And now we go to the third group of questions in this third round, and those will be to Lithuania, Honduras, and Finland and Argentina. We're learning these names, the order of the names now, I think, as we run up and down the list. But the question to Lithuania will be from the French mission, the same general question shared earlier with Argentina. So how do you intend to promote the protection of human rights defenders at the national level and within the Council? The question to Honduras is from Troquer, Honduras. What has happened to the investigations into the 22 deaths in December 2017 and January 2018 that the OHCHR in Honduras attributed to the Honduran public forces? A question to Finland from Human Rights Watch. NGOs have been banned from UN headquarters since March 2020. Although UN employees, diplomats, and media representatives, resident correspondents, can now enter UN headquarters with certain restrictions, NGOs remain under a total ban. What will you do to ensure COVID isn't used as a convenient excuse for those who are not fans of civil society to bar NGOs from UN headquarters? Will you support allowing accredited NGO representatives to participate in UN headquarter activities in line with all UN guidelines and restrictions like other UN stakeholders? And finally, the question to Argentina is from Eric Richardson. The same general question shared earlier with Montenegro. What is Argentina's position on participation of civil society in the meetings and informal negotiations of the Council? During COVID, civil society's participation has been severely restricted, more so than at any other time in the Council's history. Links for informal negotiations, which take place online, are not publicly posted. NGOs are not permitted to enter the plenary room unless they are giving a speech. And during the recent special session on Afghanistan, there were time periods where no civil society was present due to the webcast shutting down and the ban on civil society's attendance in person. If elected, would you reverse these trends and maximize the opportunities for civil society to participate in all meetings of the Human Rights Council? So we go for the beginning in this group of questions to Lithuania. And again, the floor is yours, Vice Minister Adomenas, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very important question, which is very much connected to our other priorities in the Human Rights Council and in human rights area. And of course, it's one of our foremost goals to achieve that human rights defender and all those who defend freedoms and rights could carry out their activities unimpeded. And of course, this is linked to many other aspects that we see as an integral part of human rights systems. That's to say, the rights of journalists, the rights of assembly and association, as well as freedom of religion and belief. In a sense, it's a model sort of human rights. In defending, in protecting human rights defenders, we ensure that the mechanisms for furthering human rights are put in place in the society. So Lithuania, first of all, pledges to encourage governments to fulfill their international commitments to protect and promote human rights and defend victims of human rights violations and abuses. And of course, another important aspect of this is strong civil society. So we will do everything to ensure great inclusion of civil society in the Council work. And we'll also cooperate with non-governmental organizations actively on the issues of human rights, encouraging regular dialogue with governments and the Council, with civil society and human rights defenders. Of major concern to us, and this is on the national level, our everyday concern and challenge is shrinking civil society and growing number of political prisoners and persecution of opposition activists, as well as human rights defenders in Russia and Belarus. And this is where we really have a great track record in providing very concrete support and protection to human rights defenders. In the course of the last year, accepting 2,300 civil society activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and pro-democratic protesters into Lithuania and providing them with asylum. And so this is a very lively concern, a very lively everyday concern. Also, Lithuania supports a well-functioning multilateral system where the voices of civil society, social partners, and other key stakeholders count. As our sort of particular contribution to this topic, we want to involve more actively EU states in caring for the issue of human rights defenders. So this is very briefly sort of our take on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Minister. And now we go on to the question to Honduras. To give the floor, I give the floor to Ambassador Fortin Mirense, please. The floor is yours.
Gracias. Esta es una pregunta correlacionada con la primera que se me formuló.
This is a question that was related to the first question that was asked. And I'm going to give a proper reply. My country has been affected with natural disasters and COVID, and we have been dedicated to work to fight for this situation. However, this specific question is important to us, and we are still investigating. During this process, some people went through the judicialization of this part. And in the processes that have been advancing, some of them have been penalized with jail. And here we could see some of the cases that have been asked for. Thank you.
Ambassador Fortin Mirense. So we go on to the question to Finland. So it's again my pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Salovara, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary General, and of course the shorthand version to the as an answer to the Human Rights Watch question would be yes, but let me elaborate more in a way, and because we really need meaningful participation from NGOs and civil society, and it's a fact that COVID-19 restrictions have really impacted sort of negatively on having them in the rooms, and this has to be changed, and because we really need you there. You may know that sort of it's long-term sort of Finnish practice to, for example, include NGOs and civil society into our official delegations. We feel that it's a natural part of working in the UN. So we will really work for this. And if you allowed, I just wanted to perhaps sort of comment on an important issue raised by Liechtenstein, and that's on accountability. And we will, of course, sort of work for sort of to ensure accountability for sort of most serious crimes under international law. This is important, and actually the Human Rights Council has an important role to play here because, well, it's fact-finding missions and other mechanisms really sort of report on violations, and that's an important part in ensuring accountability and working against impunity. And then there was also an important point raised about sort of human rights defenders, and that's something that where we are very much engaged, and it's a long-term sort of priority of Finnish foreign policy, and especially paying particular attention to human rights defenders who are women and represent indigenous groups, and also paying special attention to sexual and gender minorities and persons with disabilities. And we've had sort of very good experiences. For example, when we had the EU presidency in 2019, we had a meeting between the EU foreign ministers and human rights defenders, and it was really quite something in having sort of all the EU foreign ministers sort of meeting human rights defenders and discussing these topics. And I have an ask in a way that at national level, our sort of we encourage Finnish missions to support and protect human rights defenders sort of locally in different ways, and we are currently in the process of updating these guidelines. So we would welcome any feedback from sort of from stakeholders on what could be done locally by our embassies. But thanks for taking me for giving me the floor, and sorry for sort of being so long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salovara. It's a good opportunity to share also good practice examples and encouraging continued engagement. So certainly a minute was more than worth that. So we also now are coming to our last question in this group, and actually in the final round that we have, and that is of course to Argentina. So Ambassador Villegas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, if we are elected, one of the priorities will be to identify with other council members how we can go back to having the heart of the Human Rights Council, which is the NGO presence, the NGO ideas, the NGO side events. As I mentioned before, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the NGOs that had been struggling with the human rights agenda all these years. So it will depend, of course, on the conditions. But it is true, it's unacceptable if we start going back to the Palais to in-person meetings with conditions, of course, and restrictions. It is unacceptable that NGOs are not part of this new phase of going to the Palais. Another story was last year when at one point, because of the restrictions were so tight that practically nobody went to the Palais, not even us, the member states. But if we continue of hoping better conditions and in-person meetings and consultations are going on like now, definitely we should aim at human rights in 2022 with the NGO presence according to the conditions we have at that time. We will see the modalities. Because the same one idea that we could have if the modalities are still strict is the same way that we have to take turns as delegations and amount of members in a delegation to be inside a room. NGOs themselves could organize to take turns also to get in the room and participate the same way when they speak. Traditionally, sometimes when they have a few minutes, they organize themselves and they say, okay, this NGO will speak on this issue on behalf of the rest of us. So they already have a practice of having a limited time of addressing issues. So with that enormous practice, we could be creative with member states and civil society and identify mechanisms next year to have them. We miss them, all of them, and we need them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. That was, I think, an appropriate tone to end this round on, because of course the engagement and the participation of civil society is key to all of our work, as we know. And this, of course, is indeed part of what exactly this exercise is about as well. So before we come to the conclusion, I wanted to, because this was the last of the rounds for the participating candidates, but I still have a few questions to read out again for states not in attendance. Again, that will be transmitted, so they go on record. To Cameroon, from Organic Farming for Gorillas in Cameroon, in reaction to the report of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Final Warning, Death Threats and Killings of Human Rights Defenders, Cameroon diplomat at UN pledges to improve the position of human rights defenders in Cameroon. What measures have been taken so far to end reprisals? To Eritrea, a question from Human Rights Watch. Eritrea has repeatedly refused to engage with key UN human rights mechanisms, including with the UN special procedure experts on Eritrea, in blatant disregard of council membership obligations. Human Rights Watch asks, how will this change if it were to be re-elected? To Kazakhstan, from Human Rights Watch, President Tokayev used to head UN Geneva and so is aware that Council membership is tied to protecting the highest human rights standards. How does Kazakhstan plan to uphold the highest standard once it gains a seat? To Somalia, Somalia's federal authorities have failed to pass important legislation around sexual offenses which hamper the fight against widespread sexual violence. Can Somalia pledge to do this during the first year of membership? And finally, to UAE from migrant rights, will the UAE abolish absconding charges which hark back to the days of slavery and are used to intimidate and harass migrant workers? So with this, I would like to very much thank the candidate states here present for the responses to the questions, to their active engagement with the audience and the questions posed. And I would like to invite now the distinguished representative of Slovakia to make some brief closing remarks on behalf of the co-sponsors. So Your Excellency, Mr. Michal Mlinar, Permanent Representative of Slovakia to the UN in New York, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Assistant Secretary General, dear Ilse, for conducting this very useful and very informative session. Congratulations to all the participants for an excellent engagement. I have to say that we as Slovakia, we did our own similar session back in 2017, so I still have very good memories of that important opportunity. And on behalf of the co-sponsors, co-hosts, I would like to thank Amnesty International and International Service for Human Rights for organizing this extremely important and relevant event, and to you, Madam Assistant Secretary General, for your dedication and commitment, including through moderating this event. And we certainly appreciate all candidate states for their participation in sharing with us their goals that they would like to achieve during the Human Rights Council membership. The fruitful and meaningful discussion we had today provided us with really a unique opportunity to evaluate human rights issues to be in the spotlight of the Human Rights Council's work in the near future. I therefore strongly hope that this trend of organizing the HRC pledging events will continue in the future. I would certainly like to encourage all candidates to work with us in the same spirit. And hopefully next time we will have even more candidate states participating than today. I would also like to seize the opportunity to point out a beneficial effect of cooperation between the member states and the civil society, which we have been extremely supportive and enthusiastic about. There's no doubt that only with hand-in-hand approach, we are able to duly identify human rights gaps and enhance promotion and protection of human rights of every human being within the universal human rights system. To conclude, I would like to wish all the candidate states success, and of course that especially relates to their membership, where they will have an important role, an important commitment, and also a moral duty to perform during their HRC membership, so that their pledges turn into reality in the best possible manner. Thank you again, and over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mlinar. It's really that wish that is the very foundation of this event, and it's good to see how it is evolving from year to year and the engagement that is there. So Excellencies and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it really was a pleasure to be here with you to listen to both questions and answers. And we really hope that this discussion has helped to provide, to help you to gain a better knowledge, insights into the understanding of the various visions that the candidates have presented on for their membership, and the commitments, the human rights commitments, importantly, of some of the candidates to the Human Rights Council. So we know, of course, from the past experiences already that we've had with this, that this event really promotes trust, a key word that we have heard so much about during this COVID year, with a breakdown of trust in so many institutional relationships across the world, but also here for the Human Rights Council to be able to function effectively. Of course, that element of trust is key. So the trust between candidate states, civil society, and the UN, all stakeholders, and really the strengthening of the dialogue, of the international dialogue on human rights, that we also believe that this event really contributes to. So we will continue, of course, to address huge challenges on human rights. We know that, and that's why we are here. There also continue to be huge challenges to multilateralism, and that was also mentioned by many of you. And of course, that goes together in an additional challenge altogether, and particularly with the pandemic still ongoing, as we know. But we do hope that this year's exchange really has offered not just the opportunity to have the exchange, but also the inspiration for the kind of cooperation and enhancing really the spirit of cooperation, and inspire us to go ahead as we proceed. I wanted to say also personal thanks in addition for all of you who mentioned both asked the questions and responded to the questions on human rights defenders, and in particular also the reference to, of course, the responsibility I have been given as ASG for to ensure that there's coordinated systemic response to reprisals, and in order to prevent and then mitigate reprisals and act on them if they do take place, of human rights defenders for cooperation with the UN. Because of course, as we know, the foundation of it is that we need the human rights actors, the human rights defenders, to really be our direct partners in the work we all are doing within the division of labor that we have between the member states, the UN as secretariat, and of course, then civil society and actors. So here, obviously the accountability and transparency is still there. It only starts. That was also a big theme that was addressed here. And again, with this kind of dialogues enhanced over the years by more and more participation, that certainly is also a contribution, because obviously making pledges and providing the words, the commitments, is a strong, important step. But clearly, then it also provides the opportunity to be held accountable for those words said. So this engagement and showing the sustainability of it and the continuous engagement is something we all look forward to. So again, I would like to thank all the candidates here present for their engagement, for their time, for the willingness to really engage in this transparent way with all kinds of questions that are put openly by the audience on all the various human rights issues. And of course, in particular, also to the audience for actually putting those questions, without which we, of course, would have a very short event here. So again, my biggest thanks to all of you. It was a great privilege to be here with you, and I look forward to our continued dialogue as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Yeah.